The spot was by a powerful stream called the Ree, in a broad valley stretching on either side. High hills surround the valley, encircling it like a crown. From the loftiest rocks the waters wind and tumble down to the valley below. This is how in the mid-12th century Walter Daniel, author of the Life of Aelred of Rievaulx, described the monastery. We're going to make a tour of this magnificent building, and we'll do so by focusing on a number of different zones. On the church, on the main cloister, on the refectory and warming room, on the day room, on the infirmary complex, and on the chapter house. Founded in 1131 as the second Cistercian house in England, Rievaulx in the 12th century had over 650 lay brothers and monks. It continued to expand architecturally from the 13th century, declined significantly in the 14th, and experienced a partial recovery in the 15th and early 16th century. We start then with the church, the centre of the monastery, and the various points that we'll discuss are indicated by stars on the map. The church of the 12th century, which can be seen in its foundations in the nave, was hugely extended in the 13th to make one of the longest churches in the north of England. The east end was extended principally to house the shrine of Aelred of Rievaulx. The south and north transepts unusually have quite different designs. It's the south transept, which has the dormitory door by which monks used to enter the church at night. The east end has three very clear architectural orders, from the main arcade to the triforium, which would have had frosterly marble from County Durham, and the clerestory. The shrine to St Aelred of Rievaulx would have been of gold and silver. Aelred was abbot from 1147 to 67 and oversaw the largest expansion of the monastery. An experienced spiritual writer, Aelred also gave essential shape to the monastery at Rievaulx. In the north transept, we can still see signs of the 13th century tiling. The nave was probably based on that of Rievaulx Abbey, the mother house for Rievaulx. Not much survives of the nave today, but it would have had an arcade of pointed arches supporting the rest of the structure. At the far west end is the Galilee porch, a feature common to Cistercian abbeys. It was often here that lay patrons were buried, up to the 14th century. We come now to the cloister around which the life of the monastery formed. That at Rievaulx was one of the largest in Britain, and it would have been a busy place, used, for example, for reading. Rievaulx had a well-stocked library, and it is here that the monks would have studied. Moving down the west range, we come to where the lay brothers would have been housed. Lay brothers were a community focused on manual labour, as opposed to the choir monks, whose first duty it was to pray in church. The ground floor has the remains of their refectory and parlour. Their dormitory would have been on the first floor above, and these represent some of the oldest buildings surviving at Rievaulx, probably from the original foundation. On the south range we encounter the monastic kitchen, although not very much of this survives. We move now to the refectory and to the warming room. A prominent building on the south range was the refectory, with its ornate doorway. The original was replaced by Aelred in the middle of the 12th century. The current buildings date from the later 12th century and another rebuilding. Beneath the refectory lay an extensive undercroft or cellar. The refectory itself has an intricate arcade of windows. Less intricate would have been the food that the Cistercians would have eaten here, in silence. A pound of bread, a pint of drink, 2 dishes of cabbage and beans a day, according to Walter Daniel, though by the 14th century meat was more common. Next to the refectory is the warming house, where a fire would be lit during the winter months. It also had facilities for monks to do their laundry in the same season. The next room we come to is the day room, where monks would have practiced various sorts of crafts. Their dormitory was above them. At one point this occupied the whole of the east range, that is about 73 metres. The rapid expansion of the house under Aelred in the middle of the 12th century explains the size. But in the 14th and 15th centuries there was no call for a room of such proportions, and it was rebuilt and remodelled. In the early 16th century, the end of the East Range was used for tanning. The vats can still be seen here. One of the most fascinating areas of Rievaulx Abbey is the infirmary complex, notable not only for its extent, but also for its early date. It had its own cloister, separate from the rest of the monastery, at the centre of which was probably a garden for herbs. Behind the infirmary cloister was the latrine block for the abbey, which sat over the main abbey drain. Above the latrine block was the novices' room. The infirmary itself was a huge space, decorated and with facilities for the sick, including bathhouses, a treatment Aelred had recourse to many times. According to Walter Daniel, Aelred, suffering from a kidney stone, had more than 40 bath treatments. The infirmary complex was remodelled extensively from the 1490s by Abbot John Burton, signified by the eagle for John the Evangelist and 3 tons or barrels. The new complex formed the Abbot's House, which replaced the older one, built originally for Aelred. Our final zone takes us back to the East Range, to the parlour, the chapter house, the library and vestry. The parlour was the only place where the rule of silence was lifted and monks could talk to each other. The chapter house was the heart of the abbey's governance, named for the recitation of a chapter from the rule of St. Benedict at the daily meeting of the monks. Here discipline was enjoined, abbey business discussed, and spiritual direction exercised. Originally designed with 3 doorways, in 1250 one was repurposed to house the shrine of the founding abbot William, of which the keystone survives. Next to the chapter house was the vestry, with the abbey library in front. And with that, we complete our tour and return to the east end of the abbey church. At the time of the suppression of the monasteries at the Reformation, it had 125 men associated with it, 23 of whom were monks. Rievaulx's survival remains both a magnificent monument to the Cistercians, but also to its modern preservation.